I'm Shannon Vandermark. This is the Happily Ever After Without Children podcast. Welcome back, subscribers, and greetings to those just tuning in. This podcast is for anyone who doesn't have children and for anyone who loves someone who doesn't have children. It is for those who have struggled to conceive, but also for those who have woken up one day and realized it's just a little bit too late. It's also for those triumphant in their decisions to never have children in the first place. Everyone holds a rightful place in this conversation. Everyone. And that means the fellas too. If you like what you hear, please take a moment to write a review on the Happily Ever After Without Children podcast on iTunes. More reviews help make the show more visible to anyone searching for this topic. I want this show available to any and everyone, but because I am an independent producer, I don't have the luxury of a publicity department. You are all my publicity department. Thanks for all of your hard work. I'm always looking for anyone willing to speak to me openly about their journeys to reach a happily ever after without children. And that includes men. I find it incredibly difficult to find men who will open up about this subject. So if you are a dude, please get in touch. I would love to hear from you. If you would like to be a guest on the show, please do get in touch. Send me an email. Reach happilyeverafter@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter if you search Happily Ever After Podcast. Episode 6, y'all. And I am so excited to announce the healthy and safe arrival of my niece, Gracie Lee. I must admit that since I've been speaking to so many women about their experiences with pregnancy loss, miscarriages, and stillbirth, I cannot fully express the relief, joy, and gratitude that filled me to the core when I received news at 2 a.m. my time that all was well. And although we would have been just as happy that a healthy boy arrived, I am so tickled that we have a niece. When my sister told me her name, I became a sobbing wreck because Grace is my sister's middle name and Lee is my middle name. I can't articulate the deep love and connection I felt with my sister, my brother-in-law, and my niece at that moment. Then I told my husband, and I would say he was definitely equally moved, but maybe even more so because Grace was his late grandmother's name, so it struck a chord with him as well. We will never have a daughter that we can honor with our grandparents' name in that way, but my sister did it, and we feel so honored by she and her husband so much. Right, this week I'm speaking to Brandi, who is an inspirational young lady making lemonade out of lemons after 10 years of battling with infertility. We recorded this interview through the marvelous internet as Brandi is in South Carolina and I'm in London. Brandi had so many great things to say about facing life without your own children and how to speak to someone you love who has struggled with infertility that I decided to make this a two-parter. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I'll check in with you at the break. Brandi, hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. Oh yeah, so tell me I know where you are, but just tell me where you are and what do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? What's going on right now?
Well, I am in Greenville, South Carolina in the United States. It's over on the East Coast. And we live in basically a log cabin that we are renovating. So right now I'm looking out at our land. We have about 2 acres. My husband's been working very hard on it. So it's looking beautiful with all the trees and green.
Wow.
And I'm sitting in our snug right now, which is one of my favorite rooms of our house. It's one of the first ones that we redid. And there are tons of pictures on the wall of friends and family. And I love this room because I can get in my chair, be surrounded by those that I love. My husband, puppy, and I spend a lot of time in here just hanging out, watching TV, talking.
Yeah, well, it's lovely. I mean, from what I can see, I can see these lovely kind of exposed wooden beams, and that's a very English thing, really. You see that in a lot of pubs.
Yes, my husband absolutely adores English architecture. If we could live in his perfect house, it would be Tudor. And he's actually, we're fixing this one up, but he's always thinking about our next one. And the next house, he wants it to be like the tower of a castle, and he's getting it all planned out.
That sounds nice.
Yeah.
So when I started this podcast, that's when I found your blog, your Not So Mommy blog. And I really liked it because you had lots of really good quotes about just kind of appreciating what you have but being really open about the situation and the conversation and all of that. And I just really liked where you were coming from. So that's where it started, I guess, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I was so glad that you reached out. One of the things that really has helped me in my journey is all of those uplifting quotes. I know some people try to stay away from social media, and I completely understand that. I tried to turn my social media into something that was uplifting. And honestly, if I found things that weren't helping and were causing me pain, then I would get rid of those people or those sites.
Yeah.
And so my hope is that my Instagram posts and Facebook posts are something that people look forward to, and that provide them some inspiration or a smile, and isn't filling your feed with negative things, or there's a lot of politics and such. Just something that you can look forward to. So it's always nice when somebody tells me that is happening for them.
Yeah. And your intention is being received.
Yes.
You never know, do you? I mean, you get some feedback when people like it, but like people are going through that stuff so fast, you don't really know.
Right. So the messages, the private messages and the emails and such, or when somebody slows down to comment, it means a lot, because it shows that what I'm wanting to happen is happening, and it gives me the motivation to keep going and keep sharing.
That's great. And what led you to do the blog?
I was getting ready for work one morning, and my husband and I were just having a conversation, and we had met a couple through hosting a foreign exchange student who they were like us. They did not have kids, loved their puppy, loved their nieces and nephews, hosted a foreign exchange student. And it was just amazing, because it was like, finally, we found somebody who's like us. And my husband and I were talking, and he said, there's got to be more people out there like us. And he said, you should write a blog about our story, and you could call it Not So Mommy. And I kind of laughed, and I said, well, that sounds like a good idea. I like the name. And went on about getting ready, went to work that day, came home that evening, and my husband, who is a jump in and get things done guy, said, I bought the URL for Not So Mommy today.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, because I really thought we were just kind of talking hypothetical. So it was several more months before I really started blogging, but him doing that made me start thinking about what I could write about, what I wanted the logo to look like. Why would I do this? And really it was because I felt really alone when we were on our journey. Really didn't want anybody else to feel alone. Had met another couple and realized there were other people out there like us. Really wanted to connect with those people. And so I finished out that school year, and then my husband and I decided it was time for me to make a change. And so I resigned from teaching and started the blog.
That is very inspirational. And so do you want to tell me a bit about how you got to the point where you were in a position of not trying anymore for a baby child?
Yeah. We tried to have a baby for 10 years,
Wow.
going through fertility treatments, as well as considering all different forms of adoption. And it was at the very end of 2013. We had just finished celebrating Christmas with our family, and we were staying at my sister-in-law's. And she has 3 little girls. Those are our nieces. They're very important to my husband and I. We had just finished celebrating Christmas with them, which was always bittersweet. I loved spending time with my nieces, but there was always this feeling of, I can't wait till I can do this with our own child. And right after that Christmas, my husband told me that he did not want to keep trying, that he wanted us to accept our life the way that it was and to just move forward. He didn't want to spend 10 more years trying to, adopt, or we really knew that we weren't going to have a biological child, but I was really set on, I wanted us to adopt a child, and he just didn't want to keep going. And, when he initially told me that, my first reaction to him was, why don't you want to have a kid with me? But ultimately, I realized that it wasn't that he didn't want to have a child with me. He just wanted us to be able to enjoy what we had. And we were so focused on trying to get a baby that we were missing a lot of other things. I mean, just like I said, I was enjoying time with my nieces, yet a part of me was thinking, this will be even better when it's with our own kid, instead of just embracing the moment as it was and fully being in the moment. So in 2014, very beginning, I made a resolution that I was going to embrace my life, our life, the way that it was. I was going to embrace being a dog mom. I was going to embrace the fact that I had a wonderful husband, that I had these nieces and nephews. Now, that first year was really tough. I had a lot of ups and downs, and there was one pivotal moment at work when my principal walked in, and I was very upset. And this was a new job. It was my first year there. She asked me how I was. I told her I was fine. She pushed a little bit more, and I felt like she really does want to know what's going on with me. So I briefly explained that my husband and I had tried to have a child and couldn't, and that he did not want to try anymore. And she asked me a very important question and said, well, would you rather have a husband and no baby, or a baby and no husband? And I had honestly already thought about that. And I answered her quickly and said, I would rather have a husband and no baby. And she told me, then you need to accept that, let go of having a child, and move forward with your life. And I knew that, but hearing those words from her made me realize that I really do have to change the dialogue in my head. And when the questions start coming up, I need to realize that I've made a choice to stay with my husband, to accept this life, and I need to do that. Otherwise, I won't ever be able to fully embrace what I have and to move forward and enjoy the life that I have. And, life is very short, and I didn't want to waste time dwelling on something that wasn't going to change. And I certainly didn't want to start resenting my husband over this situation. And, we had a great life, and I wanted to keep it that way.
Can I just ask you, so when he said on that day back in 2013 that he was kind of done with doing it, and it still took you quite a while before you made that resolution, how did you initially react, and what was it like from when he said that to when you kind of made the decision to start trying to let all of that go? Do you remember?
Well, my initial reaction was a lot of sadness. I am a planner, and when we make a decision, I want to stick with it. And I felt like our decision was that we were going to pursue adoption. And honestly, from the time I was 14 years old, I had told my mom that I would adopt at least one of my children. And so I just didn't understand why, since we had talked about this and we had said we were going to do it, we weren't going to. And so I was extremely upset. I felt like, we have spent 10 years of our life trying to do this, and we're just going to give up. And, what was that 10 years for? Why did we waste all that time if we weren't going to finish what we started? So I was very sad. I was a little angry that he was breaking a promise and that we weren't going to adopt like he had said that we could. And I didn't understand why things were not working out the way I wanted them to, the way they should. My husband would be a wonderful father. Not to sound not humble, but I think I would be a wonderful mother. And it just didn't seem right that we weren't gonna get to do this. I made the resolution, and then I would feel strong that yes, this is working. I'm a dog mom. I have a husband. We have a wonderful life. And then somebody would say something, and it would knock me off balance. And it didn't take much at first to knock me off balance. And there were a lot of tears, and it's not like we had that conversation one time. There were several times when I would ask, are you sure we're doing the right thing? But the conversations became more where we were actually discussing them instead of me being so emotional about it. And then it did get easier and easier. And one day you wake up and it's like, I'm okay with this. And you don't really know when it happened. It's just all these small changes that eventually you wake up and think life is good. And it doesn't, when you think about the fact that you didn't have a child, there's always a little bit of pain, but it's not an overwhelming pain like it used to be.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it never really goes away, but it doesn't have to completely drown you in a way.
Exactly.
And so why didn't you adopt then?
That's an excellent question, and I've actually written several blogs about that. When my husband and I got to where we were talking and I wasn't quite so emotional and upset and just, wanting to know why we couldn't do this, he had never felt 100% sure about adoption. And I knew that, and that's why we had explored all these different types. But ultimately, when we researched about domestic adoption, Dane was never sure about having an open adoption. He really wanted this to be our child, and he just wasn't completely on board with having a birth mom or birth parents or a birth family involved. It was okay with me, and I really thought that it would be what was best for the child, but he wasn't comfortable with it.
Can I just ask you, because I think it's a little bit different in every country probably,
yes,
but yes. Is open adoption the only way to adopt from within the United States?
When we were researching, there were some places where you could do closed adoptions, but open adoption was definitely preferred. It was encouraged. And then there were some agencies where you really did have to do an open adoption.
And do you have any idea why they say that is the most beneficial scenario for the child?
I've never really researched or read any psychological papers about it, but I think it's simply so that the child does know their biological roots and they don't feel as if they were abandoned. When we were going through adoption meetings, a lot of times they would say, we don't say that the birth mom gave up her child. We say that the birth mom gave her child life, which is a different perspective, but I think a very nice perspective.
Yeah.
And it allows you to get to know like a genetic and a medical history about the child, which can help. And then you don't have this, when do you tell them? Do you tell them when they're a teenager and then they feel like you have been untruthful to them their whole life? It's just the stories out in the open from the very beginning. Okay. So that you can explain it and they know where they come from and they can process it as they grow, rather than having this big conversation when they get older and them not having all these questions and not understanding.
Yeah. That makes sense. So how far did you get along on the adoption process before?
Well, we did go to some meetings and we looked into adopting through child services. And honestly, we were getting close to putting our names on the list and wanting to do that. And then we decided to move states. And here in the United States, if we had adopted in Oklahoma through child services, we could not take that child out of the state or move out of the state for a year because they continue to do follow-up appointments. And so we would have had to start the process over in South Carolina, which my husband did go and talk to our child services department out here, which honestly, I really didn't know that he had done, trying to get some information about their process. When you adopt through child services, you have to decide, what you have to decide if you're willing to take children who have disabilities, whether they be learning disabilities, emotional, medical. So in Oklahoma, we had filled out these pages and pages of paperwork, and they list, everything from ADHD to, children whose birth moms were on drugs when they were pregnant. And it may sound strange, but my husband and I honestly, we didn't want to talk about it. We wanted to just each be able to say, here's how I feel. And so we would look at the disability, and then we would almost do like a rock, paper, scissors thing. We did our fist, and we would count out 3 and then put up our fingers. And 1 meant that we would accept a child with that disability, and 2 meant that maybe we'd have to talk about it. We weren't sure. And 3 meant we didn't think we could handle it. And so we would mark no. And a lot of them we agreed. If I said maybe and my husband said no, we marked no. We marked whatever the highest one was. And we did not do a ton of discussion. Every now and then I would ask why. My husband was doing a biology degree at that time. And so for the medical illnesses, a lot of them did concern him because he knew all of the complications that would come along. We also checked into embryo adoption. That was another one that we got rather close on. Ultimately, what kept us from that was my husband not wanting an open adoption, wanted to keep a secret. He didn't want to tell everyone that we had adopted an embryo. He wanted the baby to believe that he or she was our child. And I was walking in the hall one day and heard some science teachers complaining a little bit that they couldn't do this genetics lab because administration was worried that someone might realize they were adopted and their parents hadn't told them.
Wow.
Yeah. And that I went home and I told my husband, I said, we really need to think through this. And since he really felt strongly about that, we decided not to do the embryo adoption, also because of what are the genetics of the child. It was in the courts, the embryos were seen as property. So you weren't really adopting, you were just transferring property, but it was very new.
So is that different from an egg donor situation?
Well, like with an egg donor, you would have a woman's eggs, but then, my husband's sperm could have been used to fertilize them. Whereas with embryos, the baby would be, or the embryo, I say it's a baby, would be implanted, and hopefully I would get pregnant. So I would carry the child. However, the child wouldn't be, my genetics or my husband's genetics. So, which was another complicated thing. How do you explain to a baby that they grew in your tummy, but they're not your biological child? It's complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated. And with all of this online kind of DNA things, we can send away and find out how much, I found out I'm actually more English than my English husband, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But I've got some Native American in me, so I was happy to find that out. And finding that out, I was like, well, they aren't giving me any old results, because I thought that I definitely had that. So that was confirmed. But you could send, who knows what we'll be able to test in the future, and that could be a really awkward way to find out that you're not actually from your parents.
Right. Right.
So so you were able to carry, you just weren't able to actually conceive.
Actually, no, I never did get pregnant. And so when we were considering embryo adoption, I mean, that's the other thing. Could I actually get pregnant? Would an embryo implant? We didn't know for
Right.
sure. I have endometriosis. My husband has issues as well. So together, we just cannot make a baby. The doctors seemed to think that I could carry a child. I don't know why exactly, but we were willing to give embryo adoption a try to see if I could, until we started thinking about all of the various scenarios and ramifications. And we always wanted to think about our baby, our child, and what would be best for him or her. And you know, if my husband wasn't comfortable with telling them, but it would be best to tell them, then we figured perhaps this isn't what we should do.
It sounds like your conversations are so just generous, and I don't know, you have a really open relationship with your husband, that the fact that you can have those conversations is pretty amazing, because I mean it's hard to have those conversations, and it's also hard to get past the feelings and actually be organized about what you both think.
Yeah, it definitely is. And as sometimes they were easier to have than others. I mean, it's not as if we never argued or cried or yelled, but somehow eventually we would get to the point where we could discuss. And I was not comfortable with doing in vitro fertilization. I just wasn't comfortable with IVF. I didn't know what we would do with the embryos that we didn't implant. To me, their life, I didn't want to just let them die. When the doctor said that in the doctor's office, I started crying. And my husband did not push me to do IVF, even though he was comfortable with it.
So I haven't looked into IVF for myself, but so they try to fertilize as many eggs as possible. And if they've got more than 2, they only implant 2 now, right?
Yeah, when we were talking, that was another thing. I think they would implant up to 3, but you needed to decide how many are they going to implant, and be willing, if they all took, to have, triplets or twins. So that's a whole other discussion you have to have. Deciding if financially you can handle that. Yeah. You've already paid all this money to do IVF, and now, you may have 3 babies, which is wonderful. It is. It's just that you do have to think, can we take care of 3 babies if all of them implanted?
Yep.
But you may have more embryos, and so they would choose what they think are the most viable embryos, and then you have to decide what you're going to do with the leftovers. Are you going to freeze them and try to get pregnant again later? Are you going to put them up for embryo adoption? Are you going to give them to science? Are you just going to let them die? Are they going to be discarded?
Oh,
yeah.
Right.
And those are tough decisions to make.
Yeah. I am going to take a little break here to tell you about a book that really cured me, I'd say. I'm not sure what stage of my infertility and miscarriage struggles I was going through when my mom gave it to me, but I know for certain it took me a while to crack it open. What my mom gave me was a small book called Attitudes of Gratitude. It has little hand-drawn hearts on the cover, and the subtitle reads, How to Give and Receive Joy Every Day of Your Life. I think I was angry to receive this book at first because it kind of felt like a slap in the face. But when I did crack the cover open, I devoured it. I read it over and over again, and I used it like a textbook. I followed the suggestions as though my life depended on it, because it kind of did. I bookmarked a few passages along the way, which I'll share with you. The chapters are all broken down by a series of meditations on gratefulness. And the first quote from the first chapter is, "If you look to others for fulfillment, you will never be truly fulfilled. If your happiness depends on money, you will never be happy with yourself. Be content with what you have. Rejoice in the way things are. When you realize there is nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you." It's hard to accept that, but it is true. It is definitely true. This is my favorite one. "You cannot be grateful and unhappy at the same time." If you think about that and you actually try, it is true. If you're feeling unhappy and you think about all of the things that you have, the abundance in your life, you can't have both of those emotions at the same time. So it's a good little trick to get you out of a hole sometimes. And then as an example of the little exercises that she has, one of them is, right now, write down the 10 hardest or most terrible things that have ever happened to you. As you look over the list, can you see the gifts that each one of them have brought? Because really, it's so easy to just get wrapped up in the terrible things that happen to you and, self-pity and why me and life is hard. And that's sometimes you feel like that. Of course you do. And you can't instantly snap out of it. But if you look at everything like there's got to be some sort of silver lining or life lesson in it, then it makes it a lot less harsh. You feel less punished and more like you're a student in the school of life. And another exercise that I like, that I think I did one year, that I would like to do more, is send Thanksgiving cards. And this chapter says, "For more than 30 years, my family has sent Thanksgiving cards rather than Christmas cards to our friends, desiring to spread our gratitude for the many gifts of life. What a great idea. Rather than sending a Christmas card, a holiday letter listing all of our accomplishments, or a rote greeting, what if we took the time to catalog the things we're grateful for and tell people about those? Wouldn't it feel wonderful to open your mailbox and have a card from a friend thanking you for being in her life? Wouldn't it feel great to be the person who sends such a card?" So when you really think about it, there is just so much to do, so many people to share your love with. It can actually be hard to find the time to be sad for very long. Again, that book on gratefulness meditations is called Attitudes of Gratitude by M.J. Ryan. And I have to thank my mom again for giving me this book, which set me not only on the path of healing, but also onto the path of happiness and gratitude, which feels so comfortable and natural to me now. Thanks, Mom. Let's get back to the interview. Brandi and I are sharing our experiences with deciding not to adopt and how shockingly judgmental others can be about this very personal decision. I'll check in with you on the other side.
We had stopped fertility treatments earlier in our journey and were then seriously looking into adoption. And then, Dane just realized that he wasn't comfortable with it. And so 10 years into our journey was when we stopped and decided that we would try to accept being childless. And we're now in year 5 of accepting this new phase and journey of our life of being childless, not by choice.
So what would you say to somebody, I don't know if anybody's actually said this to you. I mean, I imagine they probably have, but, so your husband doesn't want to adopt, like, how can you let him, like, what, don't you get a choice in this? Like, your husband seems to be preventing you from having the one thing that you want. Like, how can you let him make that decision?
Right. And I actually had a couple of family members who were quite upset about the situation and did feel that I could have a child if it weren't for Dane. And, what I say is we are a couple. We're in a marriage. We took vows. And, those vows said for better or worse, in sickness and in health, in good times and in bad times. And, infertility, it's an illness. I would not leave my husband over other illnesses. So why would I leave him over infertility? Just as, I have endometriosis, he's not leaving me because I have endometriosis. And this was just part of the bad. It was part of the worse. And that's just marriage. There's good things, there's bad things, but we're together. And, like I said, he was very comfortable with IVF. I wasn't. He didn't push me to have IVF. Well, someone could say to him, well, if she would just do IVF, you could have a baby. So why are you staying with her? She's preventing you from having a child. And my husband loves children. He loves our nieces. He loves our nephews. We had a foreign exchange student and he was extremely involved. He was just really thinking through how he felt and what he was comfortable with. And you have to be honest with those feelings and emotions. And, with adoption, they always say it shouldn't be a second choice. You really need to be comfortable. You're going to bring this child into your home. They need to be your child. And, I wrote in a blog once, and it's kind of scary to put this out there for fear of judgment, but not everyone has a heart for adoption. I mean, it is a calling. And if you're not 100% sure, then you shouldn't do it. Yes, I felt like I could. But again, my husband and I are in a marriage, so it takes the two of us to have a baby, no matter how that comes to be, whether, through pregnancy or adoption. Now, I know a lady who has adopted 3 children and is a single mom, and I think it's incredible.
Wow.
I mean, what she is doing is phenomenal. And she has built her family and, is an excellent mom and changed those kids' lives. I wasn't single, though. I had someone else in my life that I had made a commitment to. And, we were 13 years into a marriage when my husband said that he didn't want to try anymore. Because 3 years in, we decided to start building our family. 10 years later, we still haven't been able to do that. 13 years of marriage. I just couldn't throw something like that away simply because he was being honest with me about his feelings.
Yeah, completely. I mean, and the presumption that, he'll fall in love with the child once it's actually in your house.
Right.
So,
and,
yes.
He probably would have, because I know my husband. However, why would you force someone to do something when they've clearly told you that they just aren't comfortable with the situation?
Yeah, it doesn't put you really in a strong position down the line when you run into what will inevitably be a series of challenges with any child. Yeah. And then all of a sudden your husband's saying, I did say, I didn't want to do this.
Exactly.
And how horrible is that?
Right.
We had a very similar situation, and I started reading all these books, like What Your Adopted Child Wants You to Know, What to Expect When You're Adopting, all these books, which I can ship out to anybody for free who wants them, because it's just, I've got so many reference materials of those years of trying different things. But, and it would break my heart reading these books about these kids, and you want to help them all. But then I just kept having, and my husband was he was slowly warming up to it, but I felt like it was a lot of convincing, and I wasn't super comfortable with that. But all I kept thinking, because it seems to be a common thread in a lot of these stories, is what they're going to punch a hole in the wall. At least like there will come, they might be fine for years, but then it'll hit that their biological parents abandoned them. It will boil over. It could be it's usually when their hormones start kicking in at 15 or 16, and they don't want you to tell them what to do, and somebody will punch a hole in the wall. And I was just picturing that moment and picturing my husband and I. And if we were a team, you know, you just go like, well, we knew this was coming. Let's just, you know, knuckle down. But
Right.
the horrible thought that he could just look at me and just walk out and be like, I told you I couldn't do this. And then I'm left in this house with like, I just, yeah, because you have to think like that.
You really do. And, you know, going back to the, do you want a husband and no baby or a baby and no husband? You know, I wanted, when I pictured my life, it was my family. It was, you know, me, my husband, and our child.
Yep.
And so I needed and wanted his support, and I knew a child needed and wanted his support as well. So it was a scary thought to think, you know, if this causes so much stress that it could tear us apart, am I willing to risk that? And I think these are all the things that people who are really trying to conceive because they have infertility issues, or, you know, however you come to be childless, not by choice, there's a lot of things that you're thinking about that people who simply get pregnant don't really have to think about. You don't have time to think about it.
Yeah.
It's not that they don't have their own challenges. Of course they do. But if every single person had to think about all these issues before they had children, you might not be so quick to ask someone, well, why didn't you just?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we thought about it. It wasn't just a quick decision of, oh, that's just too difficult, we're not going to do that. I mean, it was a lot of discussion and thinking about everything.
Yeah, so I think that was something that you were talking about in your blog, is some of the annoying things people say about the adoption thing. What are some of the things that people said to you?
I did get the just adopt, and, you know, if you'll just start adopting, then you'll get pregnant. And you hear those stories all the time. The one that I hated the most was just relax. I am a worrier by nature. I know I'm a high-strung person. So, you know, telling someone who has been diagnosed with infertility, and my husband and I were diagnosed with severe infertility, to just relax, it is not helpful at all. And in fact, it felt like they were telling me I was doing something wrong, and I was the reason that we were not able to get pregnant. But I joke now that, you know, when you're charting every day and having to pinpoint when you're ovulating, how is it possible to just relax? I mean, you know, it's not like you just go on date night and have a glass of wine. I mean, there's a ton of science that's going into this. So the just relax was ridiculous, and I really disliked it. On
that topic of just relax, you're not even really supposed to be having alcohol, which, you know, obviously I didn't completely follow, but, you know, I was going through these alcoholic peaks and valleys of like, well, we can't be drinking while we're trying, and don't you dare have a beer,
right?
Which goes down really well.
Yeah.
It makes anyone want twice as much, and then going to like, oh, we haven't been successful. Oh, drink the whole bottle of wine.
Exactly. I had a friend at work who was very observant. I was blessed to have some people who are really supportive during our battle. And she knew every month when it didn't work for us, because I avoided caffeine. You know, I wouldn't eat hot dogs. I wouldn't get in a hot tub. I mean, anything they said that could possibly hurt you, I wouldn't do it. But I would have a Dr. Pepper once a month when I found out that we weren't pregnant. And she came into my classroom one day and asked me how I was doing, and, you know, and said that she was sorry that it didn't work. And I'm like, how do you even know that? And she said, well, you have a Dr. Pepper every month. And when you have your Dr. Pepper, I know. And I was like, what an amazing friend to pay attention to something like that. I mean, that was incredible.
Yeah. And also, That's your splurge is pretty impressive.
Well, nowadays it's martinis, but back then it was Dr. Pepper.
Martinis, what kind?
I love any type of dessert martini, but chocolate martinis are my favorite.
Nice.
Yeah.
I haven't tried that at home. I feel like it's so dangerous for me to have actual cocktail making things at home, because it just goes like, it's like having ice cream in the freezer.
Yeah, you just can't stop. I understand that.
It's just a dessert. It's fine.
That's right.
Thank you for listening. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so now. If you have any comments or feedback, or if you have your own story to tell and would like to be a guest on the program, please email me at reachhappilyeverafter@gmail.com. If you like the show, please write a quick review in iTunes so that you can help me spread the word. More reviews help make the show more visible to anyone searching for this topic within iTunes. Another great way to help is to become a patron. Please visit the Happily Ever After Without Children page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Happily Ever After podcast to make a monthly contribution so that I can remain an independent producer and so that you can get exclusive perks. And finally, please share the details of this podcast with your network of friends and family. You never know who else might be suffering and could really use a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. This is your host, Shannon Vandermark, and I thank you for listening.